Yeah, thank you. Just going to the money aspects of the matter first. So you said $63 million was the cost to Australia, 115 to Malaysia, and 20 million to China. How were those funds appropriated and to whom? So did the Malaysian government write a cheque to the Australian government, to the ATSB, through some other method?
I can perhaps answer that for you, Senator. It was done by electronic transfer, surprisingly enough. No one in a suitcase with...
But into consolidated revenue or into a special budget?
No, it was into our budget, actually, as I understand it at the time, and indeed there was some big lumps of money that came in from Malaysia at different times to fund a big proportion of the surge.
But you're satisfied, so there was some talk in the media that maybe the Malaysian government hadn't paid what
Incorrect.
they had committed to.
No, they committed and paid.
So
if I can just add, Senator, also there was a program management board that oversaw the expenditure of the funds, plus we had the processes and the funds audited by KPMG. So in terms of all those audit reports and the money's in and out, that's certainly available if you'd like that.
Sure. Maybe it's worth tabling the KPMG report, actually.
I'll take that on notice and we'll provide the...
Thank you very much. Mr. Farley, you were describing the last stages of the flight, and you said that you'd conducted a whole bunch of analysis, modelling effectively of this perturbation. I'm not sure what you called it.
Fugoiding. Fugoiding?
Fugoidin, named after some smart guy, no doubt, or girl. Fugoidin, this has been modelled, but do you have any data? Normally when you model something, you then try and match the model back to any data points, but it sounded to me like you said that you had a last transmission, there was 8 minutes apart, but you didn't have any data after that, did you?
Apologies if I was unclear, Senator. What we had, you're correct, the previous transmission was at the 6th arc, what we call the 6th arc, and the final transmission was at the 7th arc, and it was consisted of a log-on request and log-on acknowledge. So there's 2 data points at the 7th arc. So Boeing did the majority of the simulations, although some others were conducted early in the search by the Air Accident Investigation Branch, for example, to work out a maximum glide distance, if you like, unpowered. And that's included in our report. In fact, all of this is included in our reports. And the fugoids that Boeing looked at in the final series of simulations, if you like, the advice from Boeing is that the rates of descent determined by DSTG were consistent with a fugoid that was less stable. And this, of course, all was raised at the first principles review, which we conducted in November 2016. We sat back and said, well, why haven't we found it? And of course, where you don't find something is evidence as well. We looked carefully at the search and the search data and where we'd looked, and stripped all the assumptions back to, well, why?
But I'm going back to that last transmission as the last piece of data that you had from the aircraft.
Correct.
You've made the presumption that occurred at the point of did you say the flame out of?
Second engine, well, it's actually 2 minutes beyond. It takes 2 minutes. The scenario was that the second engine flamed out, which is interrupted power to the satellite communication system. And then there was just enough, and we modelled this, Boeing modelled this too, there was just enough fuel for the APU to start up, spool up, come online, and for the log-on process to be complete. It takes about 2 minutes.
Okay, but at that point, the aircraft was in level flight.
No, the aircraft...
corrected by this rudder offset that had been applied?
After the first engine flamed out, you get the rudder correction, thrust asymmetry compensation. When the second engine flames out, it spools down, the rudder comes back, and just a little rudder stayed on. And this is what established, if you like, that left-hand turn. So by the time those...
So the data you had coming back to the satellite was giving you rudder angles?
No, the data was
It's just handshaking, you said, wasn't it?
correct, but the actual behaviour of the aircraft once one engine flames out and the second engine flame out is well understood.
Predictable.
Yeah, and
I
Boeing
understand.
provided
I understand
that
where you're going,
analysis.
but the
Yeah.
reality is you've got a data point.
Yep.
And then from there you make some assumptions and you do some modelling, and that modelling is based. It sounds as though there was no one. You've based the modelling on what happens when no one is in charge of the aircraft. You've gone to Boeing. They've described the rudder movements. They've described the perturbation, and you've modelled that. But you actually have no data points to say from that point that that is correct. If, for example, there was someone still in control of the aircraft, that last data point could have occurred, and a completely different set of events could have then followed, and you have no data that would show you conclusively that that didn't occur.
Nothing conclusive, but I can't imagine why any pilot would be looking at flying an aircraft with descent rates between 13,800 feet a minute and 25,000 feet a minute, Senator.
Okay, so where those descent rates, where did you get those from?
These come from the analysis of the...
The models again?
No, not the
data?
models. This is based purely on hard data. This is analysis of the burst frequency offsets associated with those final two transmissions. This is work done by DSTG.
So you were saying between the 8-minute bursts you could see rapid changes in altitude?
8 seconds between those two communications. So what we've got is a rate of descent which varies between 2,900 feet a minute and about 5,000 feet a minute. 8 seconds later it's doing about 13,000 to about 25,000 feet a minute.
That's from the scientists in Adelaide at Defence Science and Technology Group. That's the burst frequency offset analysis from the transmission.
So it's a Doppler. You're looking at Doppler or something, aren't you?
It's a Doppler, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and having some looking at the frequency of the transmission and no doubt a whole bunch of angles to satellites, there could be a bunch of error data, the errors within that Doppler
That's why
measurement.
we've got a range, Senator. If they could have established the angle, if you like, the heading the aircraft was flying, and the time that the satellite data unit had been the power outage, the length of that, we could have narrowed it down to a single rate of descent, but these are rates of descent which allow for everything. The actual direction the aircraft was flying, the time of outage, the longer the outage, and it gets pretty technical here, but the longer the outage, the longer it takes to warm up the oscillator within the satellite communication system, which makes the error potentially larger, if you like, of the burst frequency offset. So they modelled all of that and accounted for all of that. It's published, Senator, if you care to read the analysis.
So that's in this report.
The summary's in the operational report, but DSTG have independently published that one in the IEEE conference papers. I've got a copy here if you'd like to see it.
Yeah, look, I think if you could table that would be